Hello and welcome to the 9th video in this series, making simple Floppy Robin using JavaScript and the Cocos2d platform. So this video then, there's not going to be any change at all to the application which we had in the last video with the tubes spawning, you can see in the console here, well theoretically spawning. What we need to do here before we actually get the tubes onto the screen is we need to do a little bit more setup, and that's define some constants. And I wanted to explain a little bit about what these constants are as well, so it's clear how the game's going to work with the game logic. So I've prepared something very roughly and quickly here using Keynote, just to try and explain how things are going to work in the app. So if you imagine the blue is the game screen here, and I'll excuse the graphics and stuff here because this is done not to be expertly drawn, but more just to explain. We have three types of tube. Let's say in our case we can have a pair like this where the robin has to go between them. We can have one which I'll call upper, which comes from the upper direction that the robin has to go underneath, and we have one called lower, which the robin has to get over. Now what we don't want inside the game is a situation, say, where the upper is generated and it's up here, or the upper is generated and it's down here, which would make it probably impossible for the robin to get around. They have to stay, the tubes, generated within certain boundaries, especially the pair, which can be quite difficult to get through. There'd be no point in having a pair, say, that goes off the screen almost like this or something. We have to keep things sensible, manageable and playable, and to do that we're going to define a set of constants. So the kind of constants we're going to declare are we're going to declare some for what are called single and for double. Now in the case of single, it means the case where we have either a lower or an upper. A double would refer, when you see me typing them out in the code, to a pair. What we're going to need to define is we're going to need to define, for the case of the lower, a gap to the top, and this is the this is the gap, the minimum gap that the tube will leave to the top of the screen. So it will go no higher than this gap. And that's to make sure that we can always get over that tube. Likewise, we'll have a single gap to the bottom where this tube won't be able to be positioned to allow less than a certain predetermined gap at the bottom there to make sure the robin can get underneath. And we'll define also the same kind of thing in terms of a pair. There'll be a top and a bottom definition for the topmost or bottommost tube of exactly how far up and down they can go. The other thing that will be declared then is the minimum and the maximum gap, because the other problem we have is, well, this tube here will be limited how far up it can go. There's no limit to how low it can go. So we want to actually leave a minimum gap to the top of the screen and also a maximum gap to the top of the screen, just to make sure that the tube doesn't make anything too easy or too difficult. And likewise, the same thing will be defined for the pair of tubes as well. The gap between the tubes will have a minimum, so it won't go like this, and it'll also have a maximum, so it won't leave us a gap that looks like this. The last thing that we'll also define inside the constants is something called an offset. So every time a tube spawns, it'll actually spawn with an offset, so it's off to the right of the screen and start scrolling across the screen this way, and when it's finished there, it'll become set to become inactive, and when we need to spawn a new tube and an inactive one will be found, it'll be spawned at +100 and start scrolling across the screen like this. So hopefully that little bit of diagram there has made everything clear. All that remains now is to write the constants in. So I'll do this very quick because it's not very difficult to do. So I've made a mess already with caps locks on, didn't realise. So I just want to do single gap top and set this then equal to 440. Now these are constants that I've already determined previously that seem to work okay. We can always tweak, and in fact the nice thing about doing it like this is we can tweak these as we play the game anyway. Single gap bottom then is equal to 230. And then we want single gap max, and we'll set that then, we want the maximum gap that we're going to have equal to 280, and single gap min is equal to 160. Should actually is going to be governed, I've just realised, by the gap top or the gap bottom anyway, depending on which way up the tube is, it's kind of irrelevant, that one, but never mind, I'm not going to change anything now. We're going to take exactly the same set of constants and oops, I've forgotten to put the k's in here, so I'll put those in here. And we're going to change the single now for double. Just put those in here like this. And in case of the doubles, I've got 480, 120, 220 and 140. And again, I think the double gap min is actually irrelevant. Anyway, okay, the next thing we want to do is you remember that we have 3 different types of tubes, so we can have the pair, the upper or the lower, and we've actually got a 4th, which is a type none, which is for at the start of the game, because we'll always keep track of what the most recently spawned type was, so that we don't have too much repetition of the same types of tubes, so we get some variance. So we'll have k tube type upper, and we can set that then equal to 0. And this will just be used inside a variable in the main game. I can just do lower and pair and none, and just set this equal to 3, 2 and 1. And the other thing, like I said, we wanted is that when a tube scrolls across the screen, here it gets set active, and as soon as it goes off the left of the screen, it'll get set to a state of inactive, which means it can be reused by the game. So we want a couple of variables for that, or constants for that, sorry. So we'll have tube state active and set that equal to 0, and we'll have tube state inactive as well, set that equal to 1. So it's always better to be able to reuse things. And then we want to set these offsets that I was talking about. So we'll have the k-tube offset x, which will be equal to 100. And then we'll have the k-tube inactive x, which will be equal to minus 1000. So when they're inactive, you'll actually end up on the game with a situation like this. I'll just make the game screen smaller. But you'll end up with, once you've had a few tubes generated, a lot of tubes sitting around. They're actually there in the game, you just don't see them because the game screen is the blue part, and these guys are all sitting at minus 1000. When we need to spawn a tube, we take 1 or 2, set them at the offset x, and then they get set growing, scrolling to the left. Wondering why I didn't use diagrams before in other videos now. Okay, so the last thing we need to do then, need to make that a little bit spelt a bit better, just scroll down a bit as well, is for the scoring later on, we'll give a score for a tube equal to 1, because we might want to say set a score for a pair is different to a single, but for now we'll leave it like this. So k-tube score is 1, and we'll set actually the z index as well for the tubes. So we want z index tube is equal to 35, so that'll go in front of the mountains but behind the trees and behind the floor. And the last thing we need to do then is actually just get the tube image. So I'll get the tube image, which you should have by now, hopefully in a download. I think it's with most of the zip packages with the videos. And that's actually it. We've got all of the constants set up and ready to go in the next video to start actually creating the object that allow us then to draw the tubes on the screen. So a fairly simple video, but I think important to explain the concept of how things are going to work. The app still looks the same, and like I said, in the next video we'll get on with actually implementing the tubes. Thanks very much for watching.